We are continuing our opponent previews for Colorado, and we've got James H. Williams here, the UCLA beat writer and assistant sports editor of the Orange County Register. And James, I appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, you've been and always pleasure to talk to you. And you've been covering the Bruins for a little bit now, and
Mhm.
it's ever since Chip got there, UCLA is an interesting team, and even before that, like UCLA has always been an interesting team because they've never really been that elite team, but they've never been a bad team. It's like they're going to be somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
but where in that middle are they going to be, right? And I feel like that's
Yeah.
sort of this year too, right?
hmm Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and so I think I started covering UCLA Chip's second year, so I wasn't there for the mess that was as it is with any incoming coach, and you got guys coming in, coming out. So there was some of that, but even in year two, there was still some of that kind of going on, right? But for whatever it's worth, it's kind of improved every year with Chip Kelly there. One thing I've kind of been saying is I don't know if this may be the first year. While they still may improve and they still might have a winning record, I think this is the first year where they don't top the record they had the previous season. I think they were like 10 wins, or I think they were like 9 or 10 wins. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know they're one win away from setting the program mark for most wins in a season, but yeah, I'm looking at like an 8 or 9 win team this year at most, and a lot of that's going to start with what they have, just with some of these competitions, which is very refreshing as someone who's covering the team, because you know what you had the last 5 years with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, you know what you had the last 2 years with Zach Charbonnet and even the running backs before him. So you know what you had. This year is the first year where you just don't know what you have. So in that regard, you kind of don't even know. There's no real benchmark for the team on what the ceiling is and what the floor is, as far as I'm concerned, which is kind of exciting in a way.
And let's start at quarterback because as much as this has been Chip Kelly's team in the last 5 years, it's been DTR's team, and he's been really, there might have been a couple spot starts, but he's basically been the only starting quarterback Chip's had during his tenure at UCLA. I mean, DTR felt like he was in college for 10 years, but literally, 5 years that he was the starting quarterback at UCLA. Very good quarterback. But now he's moved on. There are a lot of pieces coming back, but when you change out that quarterback, I mean, that's the huge one, right? And so you miss a guy that now was all conference type of ability. And now you have a quarterback competition. Then it's an exciting one. I mean, I imagine for you guys, you look at it, I'm looking at my notes to just make sure I have names, but Dante Moore comes in. He's a 5-star recruit, one of the top quarterbacks in the country. But then you also bring in Colin Schlee, who was the starting quarterback at Kent State. His OC, or his head coach, is now the OC at Colorado. But so it's an interesting competition. You got that college veteran versus the 5-star freshman. What does that competition look like? And is it weird not having DTR around?
It is kind of weird because at the very least you knew he was going to be a good quote, right? When you would do media availability, you knew what you were going to have with him. So now it's almost like, in that regard, we almost have to build a rapport with whoever the new quarterback is, and we really can't do that because we don't even know who it's going to be. See, the interesting thing is it's kind of deeper than that, the quarterback competition, because you have Ethan Garbers. You talked about Dorian starting most of the time he was there. The few spot starts where DTR was injured was Ethan Garbers the last 2 years, kind of filling in. I know one was against Oregon, et cetera, or that was Chase Griffin, who's also still on the roster. So you have guys who've played during these spot starts whenever DTR is injured. But right now, Ethan Garbers is the guy who transferred in from Washington. He's been there 2 years. He's going on his third year now. And he's a SoCal product as well. Now he's been home, and he's going to be the guy. At least he's been the guy taking the first team reps, which makes sense because he's been the guy who has been there the longest. Now, it's funny because you get into all these preview magazines and all these other people who aren't necessarily there all day or at every practice. They say it's DTR. No, it's not DTR. Excuse me. See, I'm so used to saying DTR. It's Dante Moore's position. He's the starter, and I'm like, he very well could be, and he's kind of getting some of these second team reps. And obviously that was just kind of looking through some of what we saw in the spring. So that's still a very small sample size. He was an early enrollee, so he has that going for him. And there's no doubt about it that he is a contender to for that starting role. But Right now it's Ethan Garbers. And the thing is, Colin Schley actually, there was a lot of hype on him and he came in before Dante Moore did. So everyone was looking at Colin Schley as the guy. Colin Schley is kind of, he's kind of said there's a bit of a learning curve. He's admitted that, and it's kind of showed a little bit. The ball hasn't been very accurate with him so far, but I'm sure he'll kind of come along. So they have depth and they got some talent at the position. Now it's just a matter of who Chip is going to anoint as the guy, and that's the thing. Chip's going to get the right quarterback for him.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of, if it's not Dante Moore, what does that mean for Dante Moore's future? How do you keep Dante Moore happy? Not that Dante Moore is a diva, but he's a 5-star prospect who is already being deemed as the future for UCLA.
Right.
How do you feed him early and try and keep anyone else you have in that quarterback room happy?
So. Yeah. The other big loss on offense was Zach Charbonnet, who you mentioned, and he was former Michigan transfer that was phenomenal. I mean, I'm a running back guy, and so I love watching good running backs, and he was fun to watch. But you bring in Carson Steele, who ran for over 1,500 yards at Ball State, another MAC guy. I don't know if UCLA is going to have an all MAC backfield or not, but I don't care where it is. You rush for 1,500 yards in the FBS, you're a pretty good running back. And how does he look? Was he here this spring, first off?
Yeah, he was there for spring. He looked pretty good. He wasn't getting first team reps. And again, especially as I'm saying it, it's kind of like, what could I really read or take away from spring? Because you're just kind of getting a lot of these guys situated. They had TJ Harden, who did start behind, or who was the backup to Zach Charbonnet last year, getting some of the first team reps. Again, a lot of the preview magazines have Carson Steele because he was one of the hot prospects coming out of the transfer portal. Right now you're looking at a 1-2 kind of punch there with Carson Steele and TJ Harden, which I think isn't out of the norm for UCLA. It was actually kind of forgotten about quite a bit, just because Zach Charbonnet was kind of the workhorse last year when he was playing. But all the previous seasons I've covered UCLA, looking back, they've done nothing but great things with the 1-2 punch in the backfield. And a lot of those guys would eventually go on into the NFL, with a running back being drafted in each of the last 4 years, which is an appealing thing, I would imagine, for the running back position and guys wanting to explore that option with UCLA. So I think it's going to be a two-headed monster back there, and I think that will benefit UCLA as they kind of figure out whatever they have at the quarterback position. They know they at least have two guys that can run the ball out of that backfield. But the biggest question on offense, Brian, is the offensive line. Right. That's going to be the big issue. Maybe not the big issue, but the biggest question mark going into this season, which wasn't the case the last couple of years.
Yeah, they lost a lot of guys on that offensive line. So and receiver too. But how does that offensive line group look? I mean, do you feel like it's going to be good, or is that going to be a work in progress that kind of goes throughout the season?
Somewhere in the middle. So it's been kind of spotty, right? Or it's patchy, I guess you can say, where you're not sure. You had some guys transfer in and enroll early, but he got hurt, so he was missing time, but he's expected to be a starter. So you had a lot of backups who didn't get a whole lot of play the last season or so, but they're going to be in the mix. They're going to know what's expected of them, so they have that going for them. They have a bunch of guys who are barely coming onto campus and just barely joining the program. I think one's from Old Dominion. Not even don't even have their names really in my head at the moment, because haven't even seen I haven't put faces to names yet. So that's one of the things we're looking forward to, and that was one of the things we kind of us as the reporters there were kind of aware of and just kind of reserve and saying, like, hey, the offensive line is going to be the actual weakness, because they could be very good. We just don't know. And when they're going up against the guys on defense, we'll probably talk about those guys in a minute. On that defensive line, the defensive line is going to look pretty spectacular against some of the guys that they've had on that offensive line. So it's a question mark right now. It could easily be one of their best positions. I mean, we just don't know. And part of the reason why is there's this emphasis in recruiting right now, where they've gotten like 4 or 5 offensive linemen, which is something they normally don't have. And maybe the Big Ten move is part of that, wanting to get some bigger bodies in there. But there's a lot of emphasis on the future right now for that offensive line. And kind of remains to be seen where they're going to go with that position. But they could be solid for all I know. So it's hard to kind of judge them based on what we saw in the spring. It would be too early to kind of put a label on them. Yeah.
So, I mean, offensively, you lose. I mean, that was a top 10 offense last year in the country. You lose DTR, you lose Charbonnet. It's probably fair to expect that offense won't be top 10 this year. Still good, but maybe not top 10. and that defense has got to be better because they were not great last year. But it looks like, at least on paper, that the defense could be the strength at least early in this. They need this defense to be the strength at least early in the season, right?
So that's the thing I've been saying is like, which is again so odd because especially, Chip Kelly's such an offensive mind and is pretty much his own offensive coordinator, that you usually will just lean and look at the offense and saying that's what UCLA is now, is offense. But most of their returners are coming on that defensive side. And the defense is usually kind of trailing behind. They're on their third defensive coordinator in 3 years. So that continues to be a learning process as well. They hired D'Anton Lynn, who is the son of former Chargers coach Anthony Lynn. And he really had no defensive coordinating experience prior to this. So Chip's kind of taking a gamble there. But it's also kind of refreshing that he's taking a younger guy to coach that position and bringing in some fresh ideas, some ideas from the NFL, instead of just kind of going with one of his buddies that he coached with back in the day when he was in the NFL, coaching the Eagles, for example. So it's going to be refreshing, I think, defensively, at least maybe in just what they kind of present. But yeah, it starts up front with Latu, who's their stud and is the guy I'm expecting to be at Pac-12 Media Day as one of their two guys that they'll have representing the Bruins. He's a stud for sure. And then they also have the Murphy twins, Grayson and Gabriel Murphy. There's some buzz around those guys, and as it should be for those guys. So the defensive line looks pretty solid. They're going to have some other guys in the mix and have a rotation to keep some of those guys I mentioned healthy. But it's kind of what's behind that defensive line that can kind of maybe be the question mark.
Yeah, which is not good in the Pac-12 because of the quarterbacks in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
You need good secondary play, right?
You definitely need good secondary play. They've lost a lot of leadership in those positions in recent years. Quentin Lake, Quantrez Knight, just over the last 2 years. Last year, they were pretty good at the position. There was no real loss at that position, but it still feels young. I mean, there's guys that have been there for 3 or 4 years now, and we just didn't see a whole lot of them because they'd bring a transfer portal guy in and he'd start right away. There's a guy who's coming in from the transfer portal that everyone, even in the spring, he's going to start. He's going to start, but I'm like, I don't even know. I don't even know the guy. Like, how can we plug him in as a starter right away? But I mean, so again, there's some guys that are expected to come in and play on this defense in the secondary. But also I would, I don't want to discount the linebackers that they have. They have Jarius Muasau, who was a stud for UCLA, transferred from Hawaii before last season. And then they also have a new guy from Cal. He transferred in. Let me try and get through the name here. It's Oluwafemi Oladipo. I butchered that. I'm imagining. So, as you know, when you get these kind of unique names, it's a learning process. But everyone just calls him Femi. He's going to be number 2. He's going to be playing linebacker for him right alongside Jarius Muasau. So they have experience there. They didn't have to look far to get him in the season finale last year. UCLA played Cal, and Femi put up 16 tackles against UCLA. So as soon as his name went into the transfer portal, Chip Kelly said, we did not need to look at film. There was nothing we needed to do. We knew what he was because we played against him. So we'll go ahead and put in that call, and they were able to get him aboard. So that was pretty impressive. And it's interesting because you got a lot of guys just from the Pac-12 in general that transferred in. You have Kyle Ford from USC, which is kind of interesting because he's from the rival school, and he's looked pretty good. He might be a second team guy, might be a first team guy for them. So they have depth at receiver, that's for sure. I know we were talking about defense, but just going back to the receivers a little bit. And J. Michael Sturdivant, who also transferred in from Cal. So a familiar face for Femi, but J. Michael Sturdivant is another guy who looks like a stud in the same way I felt about Zach Charbonnet. Just when he walked through the door and said, oh, this dude looks like a stud. And I have not really I haven't seen him play against another opponent yet. I'm getting that feel with J. Michael Sturdivant. So he's a guy who may have a breakout year, or maybe a name that UCLA fans are going to get familiar with here pretty soon. Well,
and going back to offensive line, I forgot this is we were talking this, but obviously UCLA gets Jake Wiley, who has been a starting tackle for Colorado the last 2 years. And do you have any idea where he's going to fit in there?
No, not exactly. It's looking like he's going to be a starter, but I think he came along kind of late into the spring. I think he wasn't there from the beginning, if I remember correctly.
I don't think he was there at all, because he played.
He wasn't there at all.
He played the whole spring with Colorado. So
yeah,
he was one of the guys that entered the portal after spring ball for Colorado. Okay. So he would have just got there this summer for UCLA. So
gotcha. Yeah. So I don't. Yeah, we have not even seen him. So what? Yeah. May I ask what is this, what is the kind of the scouting report on him? Like how was he at Colorado, and maybe kind of even what led to his departure? Because I do need to get familiar with him.
He was their starting left tackle a couple years ago and really struggled. Just gave up a ton of sacks. Moved to right tackle and was much better. And played. And it was not like all Pac-12, but was much better on that right side. And at this point, I imagine go either side. He can probably play some guard as well. And he's one of those guys that I always felt like, even when he struggled, because he was like I think he was a redshirt freshman at the time, a redshirt sophomore. He's one of those guys that I thought he's going to be a better player over time. I don't think we've seen the best of him, and UCLA is probably going to get the best version of him.
Right. And I think that was one of the things that did stand out, was the fact that he did have some playing experience, because that was kind of what UCLA needed. Like I said, they have guys that have been there for 3 or 4 years, but that it was so log jammed with guys. UCLA had 3 guys that went into the end of that, or the 2 of them that got drafted. I think there's another one that was an undrafted free agent, but there was a lot of NFL talent on that offensive line. And so there wasn't really room to get a lot of guys some playing time outside of some, garbage time, more or less. But yeah, I think Jake Wiley, for whatever experience he may have, it would definitely be an advantage for him coming in. And hopefully it proves to be part of the recipe for success for a team that is looking to fill some holes and some question marks.
Yeah. And so we talked about it at the top, whether, UCLA has been improving every year, 8-4 2 years ago, 9-4 last year. And really
9-4, that's what it was.
When you look at their schedule, they probably could have or should have won 10, because there was 1 or 2 games there that they probably gave up that they shouldn't have. But regardless, it was improving every year. What does this year look like? I still feel like I look at this and I say, this is a bowl team, but what bowl do they go to? Do you feel like that's the case with this team?
It's definitely a bowl team, but I think, despite the fact that last year was the first year since I've covered the team they've even played in a bowl, I think the expectations is they still want to win the Pac-12 championship, and as would every other team in the Pac-12. But obviously, with them getting ready to move to the Big Ten, that's something that they're striving for. Because it was kind of weird, because at first when you're covering the team, you're like, just get to a bowl game, but then you realize like they were in the Tony the Tiger Bowl, and you're like, oh, it's just the Tony the Tiger Bowl. So who knows where they kind of end up, but I think they're definitely a bowl team. I would not go as far as to say they're going to be in the Rose Bowl by any means, but but yeah, I think they'll definitely be in the mix. The Holiday Bowl could have been an expectation, but after the whole backing out at hours before kickoff 2 years ago, and now there being a lawsuit that has since followed that, I doubt there will be an invitation there. So maybe it's not even a matter of where they finish, but who's willing to kind of take them at this point. So
yeah. Well, one last thing before we get out of here, because this is the last year of UCLA being in this conference, moving on to the Big Ten next year. Do you sense there's a sense of urgency? I get that with USC. Certainly, it's like we need to capitalize on this year. They have they're in a different situation than UCLA.
Yeah.
But does UCLA look at this as like, this is a big year, or is this kind of a foundational year going forward into the Big Ten?
It depends who you ask. If you ask Chip Kelly, he'd just say, we're not even looking that far. We're just focused on the Pac-12 this year, yada, yada, yada. But I think it definitely is, because at some point you're going to have to start getting some recruits and start getting some high prospect, highly rated prospects. They continue to just kind of go with the 3-star guys and just kind of getting by. But at some point, you're going to have to start getting some big bodies and see some sort of improvement. They did benefit from getting Dante Moore, who's from Michigan. It's, which is even still kind of weird, because when you start seeing on Twitter, oh, these high school coaches are at this high school, that high school, they're not really going anywhere past, Pac-12 territory. So maybe they start dipping their toe. Deanton Lynn, the former or the new defensive coordinator there, was with the Ravens in Baltimore and has some ties to Penn State, I believe, is where he played. So he's going to be familiar with Big Ten country. Maybe they go out and send him out there that way, but they're going to have to start doing some stuff. But yeah, there is a sense of urgency. And that kind of goes back to Dante Moore a little bit though, too, with the thought of if he's not playing now, you're just going to throw him to the wolves next year and just see how that goes? Or you would think the smart thing to do would be to build him up and get some reps on him, which I can understand is why people are saying, no, he's going to be the starter. But I know Chip Kelly's not going to name someone the starter or make someone the starter just because he's looking at what this guy's going to be 2 years down the road.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting. They're going to need some guys. The other thing, though, is they dabble in the transfer portal a lot, and they're getting a lot of guys who are on their final year, whether they're grad transfers or maybe they have 2 years of eligibility left, but not anything that is like some sort of building blocks to what they're going to be in 2 or 3 years in the Big Ten. And if you look at the Big Ten schedule for them next year, I mean, there's gonna be some lumps and bumps just in general. They have Ohio State at home. I think they play Michigan the same year. They have LSU in non-conference, so it's not necessarily going to be looking good for them next year, I would imagine. Just if you look at the way they're kind of recruiting and the talent that they have now. But I think that second year in 2025 is when you're going to get a real test of where UCLA is going to sit in the Big Ten. But for right now, they're kind of focused on this season. This is definitely a season where you need to develop talent and make good of whatever this time is going to be before you get into Big Ten and start getting your feet in there. Because, if you're getting your younger guys going next year, it might be a long season for UCLA, and it's already going to be a long season just based on the schedule and the talent they're going to be playing against. So this is a crucial year for sure. One thing that they did get out of the way is they did assign Chip Kelly to an extension. His contract would have gone or would have been a topic of conversation on, because his last year would have been the first year in the Big Ten. They did kind of get that situated, so at least the coaching situation going forward. But what is that talent going to be? That's going to be where the sense of urgency is going to be, is the development process for some of these guys, starting with Dante Moore.
Interesting. Well, it'll be an interesting year for UCLA, I'm sure. And I appreciate you joining me.
Sure.
Are you going to be in Las Vegas in a couple weeks for?
I will be at Las Vegas. I'll be out at Las Vegas, so hopefully I'll see you there.
Yeah, I will see you there. And so thank you, James. Appreciate it.